Smartphones and social media seem to be the new weapons used to topple both dictators and power structures. The euphoria over the internet and its revolutionary role seems endless. One man, Evgeny Morozov, states that this is nothing more than a mirage. He takes Backlight into his battle against cyber-utopianism.
Well, I feel like I'm in some kind of a panopticon, seeing my face everywhere through 3 different dimensions. I think it's useful for all citizens to be in a situation like this, to feel themselves as part of some giant panopticon, which they also cannot explain. So I'm very good that I'm the one trying this out.
Evgeny Morozov grew up in communist Belarus and was only 5 years old when the Berlin Wall fell. While working for an NGO in Eastern Europe and the former Soviet republics, he tried to organize revolts using social media. Disappointed with the impact, he wrote the book The Net Delusion: How Not to Liberate the World. We fire images at him about the effects the new technological revolution is supposed to have. Evgeny Morozov's status on Twitter is currently in transit.
The internet is probably one of the most powerful technologies that we can imagine in recent times. It's at least comparable to the invention of fire. I think it's way beyond the invention of the alphabet. It may be comparable to the invention of speech.
Okay.
And the reason is that it's allowing us to again form a larger organism, so that humanity as a whole has a deeper identity. Until this point, we've been mostly individuals, and we've had clans and families and clans, sometimes countries which don't operate very efficiently. But now we're making, for the first time, a truly planetary culture with this internet.
So people like Kevin Kelly, I think, are fundamentally wrong, because what they do not see is that what they take to be technology is actually often not technology. It's power. It's powerful interests, whether it's interests of capital, whether it's interests of various political actors. They refuse to see that reality, and instead they talk about interplanetary missions, they talk about the evolution of the technicum, they talk about it in terms that are completely apolitical. And this is what I think is fundamentally wrong with the discourse about technology today. We take it to mean something that is completely devoid of any political language. When you listen to him, it's all about technology taking a natural evolutionary path predetermined by the interests of nature. And with talk like this, it's very easy, for example, for companies and for many players in Silicon Valley to completely disregard issues like privacy because, hey, this is what technology wants, this is what nature wants, this is what evolution wants. They want us to be more transparent. And I think we fundamentally have to oppose talk like this because in some sense, it is completely blind to power.
We are entering a whole new era, the decade of positive change. Around the world, organizations have realized that you cannot intimidate human beings into productivity. The key is to let people do what they do best, whatever way works best for them. At the same time, fundamental principles of mass production give ordinary people access to powerful technology. That which was affordable to the few becomes available to the many. Mass production becomes mass productivity. The Industrial Revolution meets the age of enlightenment. The walls have come down. Opportunity has gone up. And your only limits will be the size of your ideas and the degree of your dedication. People, this is an exciting time to be alive.
Well, you see who benefits from all this talk about self-empowerment. It's the corporations, it's Apple, it's Google, it's IBM. For them, yes, it's a very good argument. to say that we are getting more powerful, to say that we are getting empowered, to say that we have more autonomy, while in fact, all of that is not true. Yes, we are empowered to choose between 5 different web services, but at the same time, the kind of information that we share with them is no longer ours, it's theirs, and we don't even know who owns the photos we upload to Facebook, who owns the photos or links we upload to Twitter, for example, right? But all this talk about self-empowerment, about how we can make more choices, is the kind of talk that allows this revolution, digital revolution, to go on without us questioning the assumptions. And it puts the individual at the center, and we think that we are being more empowered and we have more choices, while in fact, all of those choices also demand quite a lot of us. I think it's very interesting how that company, which built more or less its image on being this very cool product that offers services that can help you transcend the bounds of power and that can help you become a new kind of human being that is creative, that is playful, how all of that has become, in a sense, co-opted by the interests of Silicon Valley. I think they started in counterculture and they ended being very mainstream. And I think this is more or less what we can expect from Google and from Facebook and from many other companies. So when Google claims that they are not evil and they try not to be evil, and they try not to do evil, I think this may have worked in the first 4 or 5 years, but I think eventually they will end up very much like Apple.
Первый западный товар, который когда-нибудь я получил, это был маленький магнитофон, который мне привез отец с Польши. И этот магнитофон, он для меня просто на самом деле является именно той частицей западной культуры, частицей свободы, потому что я хоть тогда был еще и очень мал возрастом, но я по этому магнитофону впервые в жизни мне удалось словить немецкую волну. Это радиостанция, которая работала в свободной Европе, и по ней я узнал о развале Берлинской стены. Тогда для меня это была новость, которая меня обрадовала и шокировала, потому что я понял, что начинается новая эра, новая жизнь, то, что заканчивается многолетняя коммунистическая диктатура.
There is a very interesting, I think, ideological position that underlines what he has just said, which is that media, and particularly modern media, whether it's tape recorders, whether it's video cassette players, whether it's, now we can talk about computers, DVD players, you name it, that this technology has helped people living in oppressed societies to more or less come up with an alternative vision for what the world might be. I think the impact of many of these technologies as the causes of the fall of the Soviet Union is probably overstated in the media. In part because we didn't yet have access to the archives, we didn't know how Gorbachev acted, so all we could talk about was the role of technology. We're seeing a lot of that now in the Middle East, when we focus on Twitter and Facebook as the causes of the revolutions in the Middle East, in part because there is nothing else to talk about. We do not yet know the role that the Egyptian or Tunisian army played or didn't play. We do not yet know how exactly activists communicated, what drove them. All of that will come later, but in the absence, we can still talk about the role of the media.
Looking on the Philips Roadshow here in Belarus, we're focusing in Philips on the young, dynamic, future-oriented generations and showing them the newest technologies, newest products from CD recorder up to flat screen TV, give them some excitement, showing them where in the future also products they maybe not afford today, but in the future might be able to afford.
It's almost religious fervor that you see there. I mean, I wish people were as excited at the rallies of the opposition in Belarus. They do not generate as much excitement as this Philips crowd. We tend to think that once people in authoritarian countries, I think Belarus is a very excellent example, we tend to think that once people in those countries have access to media, they have access to television, they have access to the radio, have access to blogs, that they will immediately jump on those media to learn about politics, to learn about news, to learn about how corrupt their government is. But what happens is that very often they turn to those media to forget how dreadful their existence is in many of these countries and how boring much of their life is. And of course, when you have access to Hollywood movies, whether they are distributed legally or illegally through file sharing, life does get somewhat more cheerful. The same with social networking, the same with chats. So I think we have to be very careful not to expect that once all of the people in Belarus or Iran or China are online, that they will immediately run to the websites of Human Rights Watch in order to download reports about human rights abuses in their countries. No, probably they will rush to download pornography. I do think that we have to push the limits and start thinking of blogs, social networks, online file sharing as potentially being some kind of the new opium of the masses. I think that's a radical paradigm shift from the way in which we think about them now as liberators, but I think it's much closer to reality, at least based on my own experiences in Belarus, the country we've just seen.
As I speak to you today, government censors somewhere are working furiously to erase my words from the records of history. With the spread of these restrictive practices, a new information curtain is descending across much of the world. And beyond this partition, viral videos and blog posts are becoming the samizdat of our day. The internet has already been a source of tremendous progress in China, and it is fabulous. There are so many people in China now online. Those who disrupt the free flow of information in our society or any other pose a threat to our economy, our government, and our civil society. Countries or individuals that engage in cyber attacks should face consequences and international condemnation. In an internet-connected world, an attack on one nation's networks can be an attack on all.
Well, this is just ridiculous. I mean, you see, she cannot even pronounce the word samizdat correctly. I mean, that shows you the depths of understanding of these issues at the State Department. But, digging deeper, I think the quote actually highlights how shallow and how historicist, if you will, our understanding of the digital space is. In that soundbite, you actually heard her using two expressions, the information curtain, which of course builds on Churchill's Iron Curtain speech, and you also heard her comparing blogging to samizdat. Both of those metaphors come from the vocabulary of the Cold War. And both of them, I think, are completely inappropriate to understanding the kind of challenges we have in the digital era today. Bloggers are not dissidents. They are not dissidents engaged in the production of samizdat. At least not all of them are. Many of them go online to defend their own government. Many of them go online to express xenophobia. Many of them go online to actually hunt down activists who are pro-democratic and who are pro-Western. Those are not the kind of assumptions that you hear expressed in the State Department talk, in their rhetoric about these issues. Cyber attacks. I mean, this is a completely ridiculous statement, I think, from Clinton, in part because the United States engages in cyber attacks as actively and as aggressively as other countries. I mean, essentially, they want to make sure that the Chinese, the Russians, the Iranians don't engage in cyber attacks, while Washington retains that capacity. I think this is hypocritical, and essentially this makes many people, including dissidents in China, question the honesty of the internet freedom agenda that so far people at the State Department and Hillary Clinton have articulated. And I myself question the honesty and the amount of strategic thinking that they have put into this speech like this. I think it's not very deep, it's not well thought out, and I think it has probably actually had a negative impact on the image of the State Department and of the US government as defenders of internet freedom.
We're getting close to Tiananmen now, and this is going to be the famous square of Beijing. For many, many years, whenever I pass by, I always want to just give my finger to it. That's what I think at least I can do. Just stick this finger. That's a police car right next to us.
Well, I think it's a powerful act of dissent. Whether it's effective, I don't know. Whether other Chinese people would see this video, I don't know. The fact that it's in English probably means it's geared towards the foreign audiences. Will it inspire other people? Again, hard to judge. I think, of course, we would see acts of resistance and acts of dissent in all authoritarian societies. And I think the more we have, the better. When we think of him, and if you look at the media response to his arrest, everyone focuses on his identity as a blogger. And that's the exciting story. They don't focus on his identity as an artist or as as a dissident. It's far more exciting to be talking about him as someone who is on the internet rather than someone who would engage in a powerful act of resistance and show up and be very defiant to Mao. I would probably identify him first as an artist, second as a dissident, third as a blogger. And that's something that we need to keep in mind. And the media often reverses that.
但是如果换了我是 Google， 我要怎么处理这件事情？首先是从就是刚刚您问我的 Sergey Brin 这个他的这个想法，他在做这件事情的想法，他的想法是我能理解的，但是中国的环境也是需要考虑的。你想告诉网民更多的信息，但是我觉得是可以有选择性的。如果有一些就是说跟政府非常敌对的一些信息，这些信息是不是可以做相应的一些处理？因为我想，如果你希望更多的市场的话，你应该在这方面做一些考虑。那对于我来说，如果我的国家，我生存的国家出现了很多不团结的事情，或者说出现了很多敌对的事情，那我的生活也不见得会是快乐的。我相信我们每个人都要的是快乐的生活、安定的生活、稳定的生活、平静的生活。有看过那个《哈利波特》吗？《哈利波特》里边说有一个衣服叫隐形衣，我觉得这个东西就是一个隐形衣，就我看不到的，但实际上隐形衣里边是有人穿着这个隐形衣，但是我看不到这个人，但是我能感觉到有这个人。
I think that voices like this are probably far more representative of what many Chinese think about the internet censorship than the usual dissidents we get to hear. And I think this is actually very honest because you get to see people who work in business. You get to see the aspiring generation which has comfortable, well-paid jobs and who actually vie for stability. They want stable lifestyle. They don't want any cultural revolution turmoil. They want to have a comfortable existence with frequent trips to shopping in the West, to go skiing, and have a very comfortable middle-class existence. And for them, internet censorship is not really as much of an issue as it is for dissidents and people working in the NGO community. And I think the problem with our understanding of these issues in the West is that most media reports do not go to people like this. They go to dissidents, they go to bloggers, they go to people who are on the cutting edge of this digital revolution. And they give us a completely misleading impression of what are the real attitudes towards censorship, what are the real attitudes towards information control. So in the case of China, I think the government has actually figured out a more or less effective way of controlling the internet. And they do it by more or less empowering private companies to help them. On the one hand, they have the social networking sites that are run by Chinese entrepreneurs who basically delete content that the Chinese government doesn't like, and they do it voluntarily. You actually see a very disturbing alliance between capitalism on the one hand and then the interests of authoritarianism on the other. You have private Chinese firms helping the Chinese government to censor the internet, and some of them even are making money on it. And this is something that was very hard to anticipate a decade ago or 2 decades ago, when we thought that this would only be done by the governments, and the governments wouldn't be able to manage the space. Well, the governments were smarter.
迅速找到所求，百度的创立源于一个年轻人的梦想，他要提供一对翅膀，帮助每个人自由翱翔在信息和知识的宇宙中。今天，他的梦想已经变成奇迹。
Here in China, well, of course, we still have tremendous market opportunity, but that doesn't keep us from looking abroad. We are very much interested in expanding our operations to other markets. We're very good at non-Latin alphabet-based languages. We are doing development work in about a dozen different languages all told.
So what would be interesting markets for Baidu to enter?
The Middle East, Southeast Asia, Latin America. I think anywhere where you see fairly low internet penetration, but a very high potential and very high growth rates of internet use. A decade from now, our CEO and founder, Robin Li, he hopes that in half the world's internet markets will be a household name at least. I think there's a hubris in there that says that the Chinese internet companies themselves wouldn't win in a fair fight. I don't think that's true. There has been a fair fight in the past, and the Chinese internet companies, without exception, won.
Well, several things. The first ad that we saw for Baidu before he started talking actually mentioned that Baidu provides true and reliable facts. And I find it remarkable that this is what you will put in an ad for a search engine. And the kind of hubris that the search engine needs to have to claim that what they provide is not just a random sampling of things that might be relevant to a query, but those actually facts that are true and reliable by simple virtue of being on that page. I think this is a very bizarre assumption. On the other hand, I think the broader global context that this clip alludes to is also very interesting. Baidu, many other Chinese companies, many Russian companies have global ambitions. They want to expand. They want to move not just to the Middle East. They want to do business in America. They want to sell their gadgets to America. They want to sell their gadgets to Europe. Just imagine what would happen if Baidu tries to do what Google has been doing in China and in many other countries. Imagine if Baidu hires a fleet of cars and they just send them traveling through the Midwest in America, taking photos of everyone's house, of everyone's building, or of everyone's street corner. That would be unacceptable to most Americans, in part because they would fear this global Chinese giant company coming and snapping photos and violating their privacy. But we expect that when Google does it, when Google comes to China or India or Russia, this is normal. So I think we are entering an age where the internet is more or less no longer American or European. It is dominated by these new giants, and they will more or less be engaging in new trade wars. They will be engaging in political fights that will probably reshape how the internet looks like in 5 or 10 years. I have very little doubt that the future will be determined by these giants from Russia and China who will be competing with the Googles, who will be competing with the Facebooks of this world, in part because they can offer more relevance to the local markets. And I don't think that either America or Europe are prepared. You cannot just fight them with the kind of protectionist rhetoric they relied on in the past. If they keep them out from America and Europe, you will see those companies resurfacing in the Middle East, in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Latin America, and cornering those markets, thus essentially making it harder for the West to promote its foreign policy objectives. So I think it's a very complex issue that receives very little attention. But the fact that the Chinese companies are so open about their strategy and about what they're going to do, to me indicates that they're bold enough and they're confident that they will win this fight. Whether that would happen, we'll see. But so far, at least their governments have been very successful in driving foreign competition out.
A few years ago, me and other people started to understand that most political reform that wouldn't have otherwise have happened anyway as part of a natural development or a natural flow of economy happened because something that was embargoed, something that was constrained or hidden from the public intentionally, was released.
You're clear. All right, firing. Line here. When the stage line, let me know when you get it. Or shoot. Light them all up. 202 traffic, 260. Come on, fire. Hey, Roger. Keep shoot. Keep shoot.
Well, it's hard to watch. Wars are a nasty business. I think we all know that. In WikiLeaks case, I think they took a very major step in releasing this video that they haven't taken with previous releases, when they decided to editorialize and actually call this video collateral murder. And that was a major step in WikiLeaks development, because more or less it clearly sent a signal that WikiLeaks seeks to be a player. They don't seek to be just a neutral institution releasing documents. They seek to influence foreign policy. They seek to influence public perception about the war. If you actually closely study what people like Assange and people in his orbit say, they clearly draw a line between governments on the one hand and individuals. They're okay with citizens, more or less, conducting their communication in private. And in governments, they want to abolish secrecy altogether. In some sense, there is some interesting, libertarian and maybe even anarchist tendency in his thinking. And I just don't think that that's something I agree with. I clearly want institutions to preserve the ability to operate autonomously, in part because I believe in institutions. I've spent time in Belarus. I know how various institutions operate there. I do think that there is clearly some benefits to the work of Western institutions there. I'm not sure that Assange believes that. And I don't think he believes that in part because he comes to this subject from a completely different paradigm, from a completely different ideology. It's all about reducing the power of government. It's all about reducing the power of institutions. It's all about empowering the individual. If you don't believe in institutions, that you have to give up on any idea of social contract, on Rousseau, on all political thought, more or less, that has developed since the late 18th century. And I think that project is just too much to give up upon. And certainly, the arguments put together by the likes of Julian Assange are not convincing enough.
I was working at a hotel as a reservations agent, so it was a really good job and I loved it.
In school we learned that California is, I think it was the 7th largest economy in the world, not just the country of America, but just the state of California. When I started working, it was so easy to find jobs. I mean, I'd walk in somewhere, hey, you hiring? And they'd have work for you to do. It was no problem at all. And since I've been back, it's incredible to me how much the town has changed, how many more people are in their cars, how many more people are on the streets, how many more businesses are closed down, empty storefronts, and it's just sad. Well, the class divisions are getting so much further. It used to be that you really could be born with nothing here and work your way up the ladder. And I've been reading so much on the middle ladder rungs are just not there anymore. There's just becoming more and more of a divide. And we know in history that's never good for countries when there's that much of a divide between the people with money and the people, when the people without are doing really, the worst that the people without money do, the angrier they're going to become, the more desperate they're going to become. You know, there just becomes more robberies, more crime. You know, eventually, I mean, in history, eventually they would just rise up or something. I mean, it would, you know, it could be very problematic if that continues, in my opinion.
Well, the question is, why don't they rise up? We did think, I think, that we are heading towards a more just, a more equal society, and that's not how it turned out to be. And the digital revolution hasn't really had much of an impact on these developments at all. The interesting question is why, despite all these very dire conditions, why don't we see more protest? And why does it take so much for people in the West to start using all these digital tools that, I agree, have made communication much easier? It is much easier to organize a protest now, or at least to announce a protest now, than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Why don't we see this revolution happen? So yes, you do have a lot of frustrated people in America, but essentially they channel much of the anger to Facebook and Twitter, and it doesn't actually result in things that do determine the political outcomes. It does not result in them going to the public square and demanding that the mayor changes the city council. It results in them sharing photos and tweets and changing the avatars on Facebook and Twitter. And I think this is not the way how you organize a revolution.
Wir leben in einer permanenten Revolution. Das Volk erleidet heute die Revolution der ökonomischen Klasse. Das heißt, das Volk selber ist heute im Grunde genommen konservativ und die permanente Revolution wird ihnen erklärt durch eine kleine Gruppe von Spitzenökonomen, von Bankiers, von Produktentwicklern, von den Designern, die unsere Alltagswelt permanent revolutionieren wollen. Und aus diesem Grund hat der Begriff Revolution in seiner bisherigen Verwendung überhaupt keinen Sinn mehr, weil wir immer geglaubt haben, Revolution findet dann statt, wenn sich das Volk gegen eine reaktionäre herrschende Klasse wendet. Heute ist es andersherum. Wir haben eine revolutionäre herrschende Klasse, die sich gegen ein konservatives Volk wendet. Und in einer solchen Situation macht die Rede von Revolution keinen Sinn mehr.
It's an excellent point. I think it points out to the castration of meaning, if you will, in any revolutionary rhetoric, in part because you have companies and various other powerful structures co-opting the revolutionary language to more or less describe the innovation in their products, much of which, by the way, is meaningless. Why should we celebrate a revolution happening in the financial services industry? Why should we be so excited about derivatives that are so complex that no one really understands how they function? The reason why we do that, I think, is in part because our language now functions in a way where we fetishize the newness. And I think it's very disturbing, in part because very often this is done for a reason, and this is done only to market products, or it's done to hide certain practices. And when you stick a label like revolution on it, which, by the way, now has a completely, fully positive meaning, we all want to be in the middle of a revolution. We all want to have something new, something extraordinary, something groundbreaking. And I think this is something that we also need to start challenging. Not all revolutions are good, not all of them end up well, but since, again, that term has been co-opted by the marketing industry, we end up with this fetishization, and this is something that we need to resist. There is very little sense in talking about revolution today, in part because so much of it is meaningless.
It is with enormous pleasure that I introduce Tony Judd.
This disposition to admire, and I'm quoting again, and almost to worship the rich and the powerful, and to despise, or at least to neglect, persons of poor, mean condition, is the great and most universal cause of the corruption of our moral sentiments. Those are not my words. Those are the words of Adam Smith, who regarded the risk that we would come to admire wealth, despise poverty, admire success, scorn failure as the greatest risk, the greatest sentimental, ethical risk that we faced in the new commercial society that he could see coming. And it's now upon us.
Well, on the one hand, it's interesting, I think, and Tony Judd made that point, I think, very well, that people in power would pick apart any thinker and take only the things that they like. So from Adam Smith, they completely disregard his work in moral theory, and they only take his work on the market. There is something in America especially that completely somehow disregards the human factor and the moral factor, and it's all the logic of the marketplace that more or less determines how we should treat people, how we should organize them in the pecking order of importance in society. But this tradition, I think, does result in many people finding philosophical in their thinking arguments for justifying the meritocracy of the market, that your success in society is more or less determined on how successful you are in the marketplace. And if you are not successful in the marketplace, it means that more or less it's for good reasons. You have no claims because you've had your chance. You could run your own business. It's very easy. You could have started it. You didn't. You failed. Well, that's what you deserve. I think that kind of logic, I think it's very perverse, but it's more and more ubiquitous. There is need for people like Tony Judd and for intellectuals to bring us back to reality and show us that Adam Smith is not just about the market. He's also about morality. He's also about trying to understand the kind of norms we have to develop in the marketplace.
I think it can't go wrong. I mean, it might go wrong, right? But I think that it won't go wrong because of the energy that was created in the square. And I know that all revolutions go through a time of euphoria, and then once you have democracy, people get disillusioned with democracy, and they realize, wait a minute, that's not the magic solution for everything. And I know that that's eventually going to happen. But I think that the difference with us is that 60% of the population is under the age of 35. Many of us are unemployed and we're still students. We practically have nothing to lose. So unlike all other revolutions that have happened, they've never been so driven by the youth, I don't think. And so we have a lot of stamina. We have a lot of energy. We're creating a better future. We basically have nothing to lose. Yeah. I mean, there's no going back at this point. There's absolutely no going back.
Well, I wish that were true, but I think the reality is 6 or so months into the revolutions in Egypt and in Tunisia is different. Again, we are seeing that the old structures have more or less re-emerged, maybe in different clothes, maybe bearing different names, but they're there. Look at Tunisia. Now, everyone was celebrating about internet freedom. Now they're talking about bringing back the old censorship laws and the old censorship rules that they had under Ben Ali. Looking at Egypt, a lot of people who worked for Mubarak in different capacities are more or less back and controlling some of the same institutions. So power does get back. In Egypt, I think one of the reasons why the Mubarak elements in power have been so strong after the revolution is precisely because they are being opposed by a movement that has no firm leader and has no hierarchy and has no structure. And this is something that we know from revolutionary theory. And I think that we have to be very critical. Yes, it might be easier to get rid of a dictator using the internet and using the centralized networks. But you also have to be prepared to face the very hard struggle that is likely to follow afterwards. The leaders of this digital revolution have not thought it through, and they were not prepared to the kind of leadership they would need to exercise after the event.
Progress is speeding up. If you go back 1 billion years, not much happened in 1 million years. Then technology, you go back 1 million years, not much happened in 1,000 years. The telephone took half a century to be adopted by a mass audience. Today, major innovations, cell phones, social networks, wikis, blogs, get adopted in just a few years' time. So things are getting faster and faster. And actually, you can model this mathematically, which I've done. And if you go out to the year 2045, progress is going to be so fast that we won't be able to follow it unless we enhance our own intelligence by merging with the intelligent technology we're creating. By 2029, 20 years from now, we'll have machines that equal human intelligence in all ways. And we're going to put these computers inside our bodies and brains. Talk to somebody in 2035, you'll be talking to someone who is a hybrid of biological and non-biological intelligence.
Well, I mean, in his case, you can clearly see that someone really doesn't want to die. The key word in that clip was progress. And you see how he measures progress. The progress he talks about is not measured in terms of the spread of human rights, the spread of participation, the spread of new democratic institutions and equality. It's all about gadgets. It's all about having access to the telephone, having access to computers becoming smarter. That's the kind of progress he means. All the concerns that have driven much of political and social thought for the last several centuries are completely disregarded. I mean, look how much innovation we've done since Plato in political science and political institutions. Much? No, not much, I would argue. It's much harder to achieve that kind of progress, and it takes far more than centuries to actually progress, have equality, have, how many years did it take to have, to give full voting rights to women? Quite a lot, and we still haven't achieved that in some parts of the world. And I think people like Kurzweil, they have a very bizarre tendency to only focus on things that are technological and completely disregard the things that actually matter.
Je me considère comme l'outil que la science peut utiliser, mon corps en l'occurrence, pour permettre à la science d'avancer, à l'humanité de progresser. Je trouve ça merveilleux. J'espère simplement que cet enfant sera en santé et qu'il pourra exprimer son code génétique au mieux. Je suis ici, comme toi, avec l'apparence physique que l'on a grâce à l'ADN. C'est l'essence de la vie, c'est ce qui anime une vie.
I think we have no soul. I think we have no soul. I think we have that genetic coding us, and those I don't know how you call it, connections in our brain that make we are just dust conscious of being alive, and dust conscious of being dust actually. But we have no soul. But when we die, we just die, and my nose that is a piece of carrot that I had today, it's gonna go back to the earth, but there's no soul, it will be the end.
Did you notice how happy most of these women are? I mean, they seem to be so happy without a soul. I mean, in part because you have no soul, you have no suffering, you have no pain. It's all about genetics, it's all about biology. You don't have to worry about painful decisions because ultimately they're all genetically determined. I think it just simplifies so much. And yes, it does result in a very comfortable existence. But I also think that it unburdens the human of so many painful decisions that actually make the life more interesting in the end. I do think that this complacency that you heard from them, where biology is king and politics more or less doesn't exist human decision making. It's all driven by what our genes want. It's all driven by essentially the same kind of rhetoric that we first heard from Kevin Kelly in the very first segment. So the human impact is minimized, and as such, spaces for dissent are minimized. It's very hard to express dissent and argue against biological determinism when so many of our decisions can just be subscribed and can just be written off as the products of science. So I think the kind of happiness that they had, I think it's a natural outcome. You do become very happy, but it's the kind of happiness that you get in the Brave New World, in the Huxley novel, where, yes, people are made to be biologically happy through taking pills, but this is not the kind of happiness that any reasonable being who is not yet on those pills and who is not yet part of that ideological construct would actually ever aspire to. So, the kind of biological determinants that I've just seen, it's a dream, but it's a dream that I think is false and has to be resisted.
The idea of community as the name for totality to which we belong has been replaced by the concept of network. A network, unlike community, is an entity which is constantly made and remade by two contradictory kinds of activity, connecting and disconnecting. Now, disconnecting was conspicuously absent from the life of community. The whole community was about preventing disconnecting. But you can't imagine a network without the activity of disconnecting. And I would go a step further and will suggest to you that actually the ability to disconnect is a major attraction for the young generation today of online life.
Wow. I mean, that's what happens when old people talk about the internet. I mean, I think he's ultimately confused. I don't really get this whole connect-disconnect rhetoric. I'm just not sure that even the network is the appropriate metaphor to think about the kind of experiences that we have on the internet today. The network was the dominant paradigm for, I would argue, the 1990s. But we are slowly moving away from that experience of the internet as a shared space where we could connect to different people. We are moving to an internet, or to, if you will, a completely new internet where it's all about apps, it's all about mobile devices, it's all about personalized services where my Google search is different from your Google search, where my news stream is different from your news stream. In a sense, we are talking about 5 billion internets where everything is customized based on what you want. You do not even see the same websites because the websites are customized. I'm not even sure that talking about virtual community, as people like to talk about it in the early 90s, is appropriate anymore. We are, in a sense, highly atomized individuals who may be consuming the same content now, but we don't even know about it. I think we are entering a completely new era precisely because this is what the powerful structures behind the networks, the venture capitalists, this is what they want. The more customized and personalized the online experience is, the better advertising they would be able to sell. There is no money to be made in having this virtual community. It doesn't sell as well as selling stuff to highly atomized individuals. I'm not sure that the future is us connecting to each other. That already increasingly looks like the past.